Hey friends, welcome back to Homestead on a Prayer. It's been a little while. If you've been following along with me for a while, you probably noticed it's been quite a bit longer between videos than I usually like to go. I did post an As Your Standard haul last week, but it's been a long time since we kind of just sat down and had a little chat in the garden. So today I thought it would be a good day to do that. So as you can see, it's the end of the garden season. We have a lot of plants kind of winding down. I have my squashes on the trellis behind me that, as you can see, have quite a few dead leaves. So while the garden is still going, it's definitely, it's early October here in Connecticut, and usually mid-October is when we can expect our first frost. So this is, the last hurrah for the garden. So at the end of garden season, I really like to take a little bit of time to reflect back on the past year's garden. I find it's a really good time to think about what went well that I want to continue doing in the future, what didn't do so well that, helps me plan some changes for next year's garden. Before we really jump into this video, I did want to address the fact that I hadn't posted in about a month. Usually I post about every 4 days. I've kept to that schedule pretty well for a couple years, I think. And I know I just unexplainedly dropped off the map for a month or so. And that was not planned. That's why I didn't give you guys any kind of explanation. What happened was it was time to post another video, and I realized, I was like, I don't really have anything to say or to post about. I didn't really feel like I had anything inspiring to share. And I just wasn't able to get a video out on time. And so I said, all right, it'll be fine to take a week off. And what happened was that week turned into a month, and I didn't really realize that I really needed a break until I actually was in the midst of that break. And this past summer, there was a lot going on, a lot that had nothing to do with the garden. I didn't really talk about any of it in my videos. There was a lot of, stress and a lot of other things going on in our personal lives. It was very busy. And, I pushed through that, and I still made my videos on time during that whole process. But once everything was kind of over, I realized that I kind of needed to crash a little bit. So I did that. So anyway, I'm sorry for leaving you guys without any kind of explanation, but I just wanted to mention it now that I'm going to try to get back into posting regular videos. Now, it is, of course, we're going into the off season. Garden season is kind of winding down. There's a little bit of a break between when the garden season finishes and when it will be time to start planning next year's garden. So I most likely will not be posting as regularly, but what I'm planning to do, or I should say, I'm still planning to post regularly, but not necessarily as often. What I'm planning to do for the off season is to post about once a week. So for right now, unless something changes, I'm planning to post videos every Saturday morning. So, at least for now, that's what you can count on, and I'll do my best to keep you guys updated if anything changes. So back to this video. So as I was kind of reflecting back on this year's garden, it's hard to really assess the garden fairly this year because, as I said, there were so many other things going on that were not garden related, but they did, of course, they took up our time and our mental energy. So of course it did end up affecting the garden. But as I look back over this past gardening season, there are some things that went well. Some things went surprisingly well considering the lack of attention that we gave them. And there are definitely some other things that we'll just say we're going to use them as inspiration to change up how we do things in the future. So kind of to start off this season, we had a bit of a slug issue. I've always had slugs here and there, but I've never had such a problem with them as I did this year. If you've been following my videos for a little while, you probably have heard me say that the past couple years I have struggled with getting my cucumber seedlings off to a good start, and something had been eating them. I didn't really know what. This year I discovered, I'm pretty sure that it has been slugs. They really like my cucumber seedlings. They really like my winter squash seedlings. They really like melon seedlings. For some reason, they have left my zucchini seedlings alone, which I'm not going to complain about. I'm not sure why, but they seem to like the pumpkins and winter squash more than they like the zucchini. So I'm thinking for next year, what I am considering doing is, I've heard a lot of people say that crushing up eggshells and surrounding your seedlings with them can deter slugs because the slugs don't, they have really soft bodies and they don't like the feeling of crawling over those eggshells. So that is something that I am definitely going to give a try to next spring. If you have any other suggestions for dealing with slugs, I have heard the whole beer trap idea. I'm not sure if I'm going to try that or not, but I do have it in the back of my mind as something to try, maybe if the eggshells don't seem to be working. If you have any other suggestions for dealing with slugs, I would love to hear those. I know, as I said, it's a little late in the season, but for next year, I would like to have a game plan so that my cucumbers can get off to a little bit better of a start next year. Now, that being said, after a rough start, my cucumbers did actually eventually take off and they ended up actually doing really well. What I found was that they did much better when I started them in pots and then transplanted them out. I think because they were a little bit larger, a little bit more able to withstand the slug damage at that point. But overall, cucumbers do prefer to be direct sown. So if I'm able to do something to deter the slugs, I would prefer to direct sow them. So again, I'm open to suggestions on that. But despite that, we did end up having a really good cucumber year. I was able to make lots of refrigerator pickles. We're still getting a cucumber here and there. For the most part, they're done now. But we do have probably 5 or 6 quarts of refrigerator pickles still in our refrigerator. So, and those will last for a few months in the fridge. So I'm overall happy with how our cucumber harvest did. Similarly, green beans had a great year. But honestly, I don't think I've ever, since I started growing pole beans, I don't think I've ever not had a great bean year. They're honestly one of my most dependable crops. So we had a bumper crop of beans this year. Once again this year, we just kind of stopped harvesting them because we couldn't keep up with the supply. And now I have lots of overgrown beans on my trellises that I'm going to just let mature and save for seeds. So it was a great bean year. One thing I will say about this gardening year, and this is of course completely out of our control, is that it rained a lot. Here in Connecticut, I can't really even say what's normal because we have a lot of variability in what we can expect year to year with weather here in Connecticut. But this year, definitely, there was a lot more rain than normal. It's fairly common for us to have rain in the late spring and early summer, and then have the summer kind of ends on a really dry note. That's what's happened the past few years. But this summer, I was really surprised. We got so much rain. It just kept raining and raining. It's into August and it's still raining, and it was just a lot more rain than we normally get. Obviously, there's nothing we can do to control the weather. That, I will say, I'm kind of torn on whether that was a negative or a positive because, it saved me a lot of time watering in the garden, which when you have a really busy summer, that's a great thing. We don't have any kind of automatic irrigation setup in our garden. That is on the eventual list of something to add into the garden because that would free up a lot of time. And, some years we do have really dry summers. It's been a couple years since we've had a really dry summer like that. But, having some sort of automatic irrigation would make my life a lot easier on those years. Since we don't have that, and since, as I said, we were very busy this summer, I'm going to say the excessive rain was actually a positive because I probably wouldn't have had the time to give my garden the water that it really needed, and it did end up getting that from the rain. Now, of course, there are a couple downsides to all that rain, too. It led to increased plant disease. We had plenty of tomato disease this year. We had plenty of powdery mildew. That's ultimately what I think is bringing down the squash on this trellis. I mean, the squash from the plants are pretty much ripe, so at this point it doesn't really matter. But we had lots of powdery mildew. We had lots of tomatoes splitting from excessive rain, so there were some negatives too. Overall, I'll still take the rain over the drought, but it was could kind of go either way. Kind of going along with that excessive rain, I did hear a lot from gardeners in my area that they had a very poor tomato year. People were, I'm in a couple local gardening groups on Facebook, and there was a pretty strong consensus that it was a really poor tomato year. We surprisingly actually had a decent tomato year here. I'm not sure why that is because, as I said, I didn't really put any more effort than usual into the garden. Probably, honestly, I put a little less effort than usual. So I'm just going to say that was just God looking out for us and blessing us with a good tomato year despite the weather and the adverse conditions. It wasn't an amazing tomato year, but it was at least an average tomato year. And when people around me were complaining about it being a very poor year, I'm going to say an average tomato year was definitely a blessing. So I'll take that. It's also been a decent pepper year as well. Peppers, and that's surprising too, because peppers tend to not like heavy rain. We grow our peppers exclusively in pots, which maybe that kind of helps the excess rain to run off. I know pots tend to drain a little more quickly, so maybe that's why our peppers still did really well despite the rain. Our tomatoes are kind of petering out now. We still have some, but we're definitely past the, peak tomato harvest. But we are still getting quite a few peppers, so I anticipate that we'll be getting peppers all the way up until frost. Now, interestingly, with all the rain that we had, our hot peppers were much hotter than normal. I'm coming to the conclusion that maybe I don't really understand what weather conditions impact pepper heat level. The summer did start off hotter than normal, but it ended up being, average to sometimes even slightly cooler than normal, and we definitely had more rain than normal. But what I found was that our peppers this year were very hot. The jalapenos were too hot for me. Normally jalapenos are, about my heat tolerance, and I don't like anything hotter than that. But this year, even the jalapeno varieties that we grow that are normally very mild were extremely hot this year. So I'm not really sure exactly what caused that, but for some reason we had an extremely hot pepper year. We also tried out these little tomato clips this year for the first time, and I've got to say, I think this is pretty much going to be a game changer. I can't even remember where I heard about these. Somebody told me about a similar product. I just searched for these online. And basically, if you have seen any of my videos where I show my tomato plants, I like to grow them on basically a welded wire fence. And what I normally use is little plastic stretchy tomato tape to tie my plants to the fence as they grow, and that's how they're supported. This year we decided to try these little clips, and I really love these. So basically you just put this clip around the branch of the tomato that you're trying to support and also around the wire of the fence. And when you have a lot of tomato plants like I do, just the speed of being able to clip them to the fence this quickly is such a game changer. I also really like that these are reusable as opposed to that little tomato tie tape. It takes longer to tie in place. Then at the end of every season, I have to go back through the fence. I have to cut them all off and throw them away. This is reusable, so I won't have to throw it away. So far, I'm sure at some point it'll break, but so far, after a season of use, it's in great condition. So I'll keep you guys updated on how long these last. But I found that it was a lot more useful for me, and I think that it helped me be a little more disciplined about making sure my tomato plants were tied up. I will link these in the video description if you're interested in checking these out. I don't think that they would necessarily work for any tomato trellising system, but they worked really well for ours, and I was really happy with them. Now, once again, if you've been following my channel for a while, you know that I am not an accomplished onion grower. I have tried for years to be able to grow a reasonably sized onion. And year after year, I grow these little tiny onions. They taste delicious, but they're so tiny that it's not even really, in my experience, been worth the garden space for them. And this year was no exception. So I have started onions from seed. I have purchased sets and tried to grow my onions that way. This year I said, let's try the one thing that I haven't done. I'm going to order onion transplants, and we're going to grow them that way. They may have been a very slight improvement over my previous onion woes. But, I haven't really figured out how to grow onions successfully. That is something I would really like to be able to grow successfully because they can be long storing. It's something that is kind of very foundational in making a lot of cooking and recipes. We cook almost everything from scratch. So I would love to be able to provide our own onions. I know every year I come on here and I beg you guys for your best onion growing tips. So once again, if you have good onion growing tips to share with me, please share them. I'm not sure what the deal is. I grew them in nice rich soil. I fertilized them as the season went on. I gave them a little extra attention than I normally do. I was going to say I made sure they got watered, but this year I didn't have to because there was so much rain. So I don't really know what is the deal. Onions just don't like me, I guess. So again, share your onion growing tips because my onion woes continue in the 2024 garden. One positive change that we made in the garden this year is that I added 2 green stalk planters to my garden. Now this is something that I've been hearing about for a while, You probably hear people talking about them, especially people on YouTube. I'll just say up front, I don't have any kind of affiliation with them. It's just something that seemed like a really interesting product to me, and I'd been wanting to try it out. Hang on, I have a chicken out that is invading my garden. I'm gonna go put her away and I'll be right back. All right, let's get you back in your fence, Miss Buff. Come on. Okay, crisis averted. She is back in the fenced backyard along with all her sisters. I think she just hears me talking out here and thinks that I must have some kind of treats. So she had to come see what I was up to. Anyway, back to the garden. The reason that the green stalk planters really appealed to me was because it's a vertical planter. I'm pretty limited on space in my garden, and I had been wanting to get more into growing vertically. So it's basically a tower planter where you have multiple pockets of plants that stack up. So I got 2 different planters. One of them I used right in the beginning of the season. I filled it with soil, and then I planted lots of seeds for lettuce and lots of cold hardy plants in there. The other one I waited, and once the weather had warmed up, I filled it with soil and I planted pepper seedlings in every other pocket, and then I planted basil in the opposite pockets. I posted videos of getting those set up, so I can link those below in case that's anything you're interested in. And I think I also posted a video halfway through the season updating on how my pepper planter was doing, so I can post that as well. But overall, I would say overall they were successful, and overall I was happy with them. I was actually most happy with how the peppers performed. So it saved me a lot of space. I was able to grow more pepper plants in a smaller amount of space. My experience with growing in the green stalk has been plants tend to, now I've only been growing in it for 1 year, but in my limited experience, I've been more successful transplanting started plants in as opposed to starting seeds directly in the pot. Now that might be because honestly I was not as diligent about watering the seeds in order to get them to germinate as I should have been. So I'm going to say that was probably primarily user error, but the plants that I transplanted in there actually did really well, and I was really happy with them. So that did allow me to increase the amount of plants I was growing in the same amount of space. So I am considering possibly getting another 1 or 2 green stalks. I would like to try growing strawberries in one. I know that's something that a lot of people do. And while I do have strawberries in my garden, I find that a lot of those tend to get eaten by slugs and other creatures like that. So by growing them in an elevated planter, I would probably put it on my deck. By growing them like that, my hope is that I would be able to get more strawberries that do not have bug bites or are not taken by creatures. So that's a project for next year. I'll keep you guys updated on that, but that might be a change I am considering making. I mean, it is a change that I'm considering making. I'll probably give it 1 year, keeping the strawberries in the ground and also growing a tower of strawberries on my deck. I'll compare how the 2 different types of strawberries do, or the 2 growing methods do. If they seem to do better on the deck, I may pull all the strawberries out of the ground and just move them into the deck, and then I'll use the strawberry space for something else. So I haven't fully figured out what I'm doing with that. Also, kind of on that note, if you have any tips for keeping strawberries pest-free, I can come up with some kind of cover for them, but it's going to have to be something removable because I do need them to be exposed for pollination. So again, I will keep you updated on whatever I decide there. But you can see here's my strawberry bed right now. It completely filled up with runners, and the runners are out into the walkway. So I'm going to have to dig up these plants and transplant them somewhere. I'm not sure where these are going to go yet. And ideally, I should probably thin out the strawberry bed too. I don't know if I'm going to get to that this year, so I'll see. So next year, I may be giving you an update on how strawberries do in overcrowded conditions, so stay tuned for that. I'll let you know. So since we kind of segued into talking about my deck garden a little bit, the container garden I grow on my deck, that is a major change I'm going to have to make next year. Now, throughout the gardening season, I did post a couple updates on my container garden, just on how the plants were doing. And at the beginning of the season, it was great. The plants were taking off, they were wonderful. And As the season went on, I realized that I had not properly accounted for the amount of space these plants were going to take up. Now, this was not my first year having a container garden on the deck. You know, I've grown plants on the deck. I've grown plants on the deck to some extent for many years. For the past, I would say maybe four years or so, I've had a pretty extensive container garden. And I have never had my plants grow to the size that they grew this year. I don't know what was in the air or the water this year. They grew out of control. And I had accounted for the amount of space that my plants normally take up when spacing out my pots. I did not account for how much space they're going to take up this year. So it started off great. It was a wonderful jungle up on the deck. And then it became a very tangled jungle as the season went on. Now, there wasn't actually as much more disease on the deck as you would expect for how crowded the plants were, but there was still more than is ideal. And it just made it kind of hard to navigate, to be able to tend to the plants, to be able to harvest and just give the plants the attention they needed. So I think next year I really do need to come up with a better solution for all those pots. Now, I just want to mention up front that growing fewer plants is not going to be the solution that I choose. I'm going to have to figure something out. I do have a lower deck area where I can expand some of my pots into. It doesn't get as much sun, so I'm going to have to, but you know, honestly, with the plants being so crowded, I think that did block out some of the sun too. So it's probably going to be a pretty equal trade-off to put some plants on the lower deck. So I think I may end up doing that. What I may end up doing is, you can see behind me those black pots over there. They don't look great now, but they were doing well earlier in the season. And I think I may move a few of the pots from my deck down here to this lower garden, and I may be able to thin out a little bit of the crazy foliage on my deck that way. So that's something I'm going to be thinking about during the off season and trying to come up with a good solution. Now, I know those of you who are paying close attention to what I've said are probably wondering, why am I considering adding a couple more green stalks onto my deck when I'm talking about it already being overcrowded? I was thinking about putting those 1 or 2 strawberry planters that I was talking about on the lower deck, or possibly if I can find a way to level the ground out completely down here, I may put one out here in this garden too. I haven't fully worked out the details yet, but I will keep you posted on that as I come up with solutions. So obviously that is not the entirety of what happened this garden season, but that was just a couple of the high points, a couple of the low points that I wanted to share with you guys. I just wanted to keep you updated on, you know, just life and gardening and just how everything's going in general. On a purely technical point, this doesn't have anything to do with gardening. I have been having a little bit of technical difficulties with filming videos and editing videos. Without getting into a lot of detail, I'll just say that I need a new solution for filming and editing videos. So there is a new camera that I have my eye on, and I think what I'm going to do is see if I can find any good Black Friday sales. So in the future, I may be asking you guys to give me your opinion on how well a new camera seems to be working, but that's down the road. So that's just one other thing that kind of contributed to me needing to take a little bit of a break this summer. So just in the interest of transparency and sharing with you guys what's going on, I figured I would mention that as well. So now that gardening season, at least in my area, is mostly winding down. I know those of you in warmer climates may have a little bit more gardening time to go. But I would love to hear from you guys about how this garden season was for you. What were your high points and low points of this garden season? What do you plan to do differently based on the lessons that you learned this season? Or if you learned some great lessons this season that you plan to carry over into next season, I'd love to hear that too. I hope you guys are having a great day, and I can't wait to see you soon. I will be back next week with another video. Have a great day.